Honshu and some other people played basketball on Saturday night. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, happy Monday and welcome to Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm your host, Howard Megdal, founder and editor of The Next. You can follow all the work we're doing over there, more than 100 reported pieces every month at thenexthoops.com. You can subscribe. It's $9 a month, $72 a year. It all goes to writers, editors, social media members, you name it. And those, I think, all qualify as they relate to the great Jackie Powell, who's here to join us to talk about Honshu, to talk about Tina Charles, and to talk about the power rankings, the pecking order as it relates in the WNBA. Jackie, you were telling me off the air that other players had also participated in the New York Liberty's win over the Chicago Sky on Saturday night, and not just Honshu. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. I mean, it was not Han who hit the game-winning shot, and it wasn't Han who made the game-winning box out. Those were from two different players, and shot coming from Sabrina Ionescu, getting an and one, driving to the rim while Rebecca Gardner was guarding her. And that box out came from 2021 Rookie of the Year, Michaela Onyenwere, who successfully defended Candace Parker on a post-up and successfully boxed her out to get the rebound and then got fouled.
So what I'm hearing from you is that Honshu's dominance helped lead the way to keep the Liberty in striking distance when some other players jumped in and helped as well. Is that how – am I hearing that right? That this is basically a direct consequence of Honshu's dominance?
I mean, listen, Honshu scored 12 points. He had 6 rebounds, 2 assists. I mean, That's all pretty significant. And that all comes off the bench. She played in 21 minutes. The one thing I will say is, her efficiency wasn't the typical Honshu efficiency. I mean, she was 5 for 13. She missed the 1 3. She's still sort of dealing with, shots just not falling, but there was less of a giving up, if that made sense. I mean,
it does. I mean, I joke about it, but the truth of the matter is it is a big deal for reasons we'll get into that Honshu was performing as well as she did. I'm also working on a piece for 538, but my vision tends to go towards Honshu as usual at the Liberty game. And again, you point out the stats, and we will once again point out that Honshu led the entire game, both teams in height. So, that cannot go unremarked on. But it was a huge win for the New York Liberty. And we talked about this last week on the podcast. The math was getting hard. Losing those 3 camp day games put the Liberty in a very difficult position. Even with the win on Saturday night, they are still 1 loss behind not only the Dream in the 8th spot. The New York Liberty with 17 losses, the Dream with 16, but the Mercury, who are 9th, who would not even be in the playoffs right now if the season ended today, also with 16. So work to do, but you get a loss there, and suddenly you're 9 and 18, and you are 2 losses behind the 8 and 9 as we come in. There are single digits left in this season for everyone on the schedule. That really starts to get challenging. So you said something to me off the air, and I thought it was so interesting. I'm looking at the box score, and Dee Richards did not play, and Jocelyn Willoughby did not play. This is a shorter bench for this New York Liberty team with only 9 people playing. Take me through why and how Sandy Brondello, the Liberty head coach, made that decision in your view.
So what I will say is that I intend to gather more information on this very subject, because going forward, have a lot of questions about it, especially when Sandy alluded to getting back Benijah Laney next month.
Mm-hmm.
And she said to us after the last camp game against the Mystics, after that loss, where they were pretty close, they fought through it harder than they did in the previous 2 camp games. She said, maybe we need Benijah back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a little, I don't know if it's paradoxical, because of course Benijah Laney is an all-star and she has veteran status.
Mm-hmm.
But at first I was very surprised by this. And so my understanding of this is Sandy understood how much of a must-win this was. The fact that the Liberty would have multiple competitive advantages, which were Sky were coming off a back-to-back. Courtney Vandersloot is still in concussion protocols.
Mm-hmm.
The Sky's flights were super delayed and they basically didn't sleep. And also the Liberty were at home. Those are 3 separate competitive advantages that are in favor of the Liberty. I mean, I will say, without Courtney Vandersloot, the Sky have done quite well because Emma Miesemann and Julie Allemond have been executing this 2-player game. And it's covered for the fact that Vandersloot has been in concussion protocols.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's worth noting also that you are talking about in Julie Allemond, somebody who has dealt with and recently mastered some of her biggest turnover issues. We talked to James Kay about this on the pod last week, but Julie Allemond is a ridiculously efficient scorer. The question and an effective playmaker within the confines of she's got to get the turnovers under control. And so if she's able to do that, I'm just sort of irrespective of what else is happening with Chicago, it's going to allow more flexibility to play her bigger minutes when you need it. Even things like getting Courtney Vandersloot time off the ball in situations that allow her to stay fresher in the playoffs. So it all really matters. That said, 1 turnover in 34 minutes and 17 seconds for Julie Allemond is a very big deal, but the Liberty were able to hold her to 2 for 7 from the field and 0 for 5 from 3.
Yeah, I mean, there were some open looks that maybe if she had gotten sleep, she would have made. But
Fair.
Sandy was very happy with how defensively they looked. And this is something that I think this is a game I will need to rewatch as well. But to sort of see, were they switching properly? Were they communicating? How were the rotations looking? Those are things I'm going to look for when I rewatch. But going back to the original question about Jocelyn Willoughby and DeDe Richards. So as we said, this was a must-win game. And so Sandy has been open about how it's been a struggle to figure out the Liberty's rotations. And with limited practice time, it is very difficult to work people back in as they come back from injury. And it takes experimentation. And she made the decision this game against Chicago. They couldn't experiment. Say, against Connecticut, I thought Jocelyn looked really good. And then something happened. Her confidence went down against Washington, and she just didn't look the same. And you know what? She's been out for 2 months. We can't just expect her to snap right into it. I mean, Maureen Johannes was able to snap right into things when she arrived in New York, but that was because she had been playing nonstop. And of course, she sort of hit a wall. She's starting to come out of now. But
I mean,
to me,
sorry, go ahead.
To me, the issue of health is in part why, and so it's health in conjunction with figuring out the chemistry with those players who didn't have health. That's why Sandy shortened the rotation.
I mean, it cannot be overstated. Jocelyn Willoughby, and we're both very high on, I know, has played 478 minutes total in the WNBA. And 95 of them since 2020. That is just not a lot of reps.
No.
Whatever you can see in practice, whatever you can see day to day, game speed. You ask any player in this league, game speed is necessary. And, in a must-win game, making a one-game bet on Jocelyn Willoughby is a difficult thing. But I will say that if you want to make a bet on Jocelyn Willoughby or anybody else, you can do it over at betonline.net, which is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Now, when I say all, I don't mean the MNBA. I mean all of it. NFL, WNBA, women's college basketball. You're seeing that kind of equality. It means a lot. It's good to see. It's long overdue. BetOnline is the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting to scores and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening. BetOnline, where the game starts. And so as we move beyond just a question of Willoughby and Richards, who, again, same thing, right? Game action and getting the opportunity to play regularly. Well, injuries have limited her quite a bit. I do think it's worth pointing out just how much Sabrina Ionescu has been the Sabrina Ionescu that the New York Liberty need. And when you think about, her as a franchise player, somebody with high volume, leading the team in field goal attempts per game, but she's shooting 42% overall, almost 48 from two. They're all tough twos, 35 from three, 94% from the line. Elena Deladon-esque. Sabrina has been every bit the all-star that the New York Liberty drafted her to be. And I guess I wonder whether you think that whether the Liberty succeed or fail this year to make the playoffs, that seeing Sabrina in that pantheon where many of us believed she would be is perhaps the biggest win of this particular season for them, regardless.
Oh, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. I think a question I asked both Sabrina and Natasha Howard after that game was, take me through how you think both of your leadership skills have grown, from 2021 to 2022. What has changed? What have you felt? And Sabrina said something fascinating, as you could only imagine. She noted that she feels like she and Natasha have similar leadership styles in that they're not always the most vocal, but it's about what they do on the floor. And they're both sort of learning how to be more vocal. They've both gotten more vocal, but that's not naturally who they are. Sabrina, I actually spoke to Ruthie Hebard pregame about Sabrina. And she sort of said, in high pressure situations, Sabrina is very serious. She is very laser focused on the moment. Not maybe your emotional leader, but more sort of your taskmaster leader. And I think, both she and Natasha Howard are learning how to be that, but also how to lead with emotion, which is something that Betnijah Laney, that's her bread and butter. And the Liberty have been without Betnijah Laney the entire season. And so going back to this team ceiling, it's like, well, this group has never had their big three all healthy at once.
Nope. Not once. I mean, we kind of brush over it, right?
Yeah.
In passing. Betnijah Laney being out is a big deal. It's a very big deal. And when they had her last year, because of other injuries, they weren't utilizing her the way Laney is best utilized. You're putting her in a position to ask more of her than you should. Not that she's not capable. She had an all-star season out of it. But it's not the way the roster's built. A lot of times I feel like people are critical of players, or they think it's an inherent criticism to say, hey, we're looking for X from a player, not X plus from a player. But that's not it at all. It's you build a roster so that you are putting players in the best position to succeed. Earlier this year, the Minnesota Lynx had Aerial Powers in a position where she's the number 1 or 2. And what she really is, ideally, is a number 3. She can be your number 1 at times. But she's a number. I mean, we've seen it. She's scored, 35 points, and the Lynx will win. But that's the way Cheryl Reeve built that roster, was to have her be that kind of player for them as a third option after Sylvia Fowles, Taylor McBride, ideally a fourth option when Fee gets back. Right. And so this team is set up for Benai Zeleny to be a 3 option after Sabrina and Natasha Howard. Well, that's a luxury, but it's a luxury of a team that's a championship contender. Is Laney being asked to do the lift as the 1 or the 2 while being the type of defensive player that she is, something that is a sustainable thing over the duration of a WNBA season and a deep playoff run? I don't know. There's some evidence to suggest maybe not. And you make her the number 4 option next year if they can add somebody at the very top who might be a free agent this year from North Syracuse. And you're talking about something even more significant when it comes to strength, when it comes to a potential championship, although that's a whole other offseason conversation. I want to get into a former Liberty player. People remember that she used to be on the Liberty, but just to kind of take us out of this New York Liberty thought process. They're 10-17. Their next game is at Chicago. Mm-hmm. So no rest for the weary, although rest for the weary technically because they're not playing it until Friday. Is Friday a must win? And I do that with the caveat. If you haven't seen it, go check out the Brian Regan stand-up routine about must-win games.
So here's what I'd say about that Chicago game. Mm-hmm. I'd say it is a must be in the game, mm-hmm. if that makes any sense.
It does.
Need to show that they are continuing to grow and move forward rather than regress. Mm-hmm. If they don't win but lose by a couple of possessions, to me, that proves that this team can then face some less potent teams and continue to build, if that makes sense.
It does. Every game, by the way, obviously every Liberty game is must watch because of Honshu, but there is not a single Liberty game after this Chicago 2-game series that isn't against a direct competitor. And Sandy Brundello talked about this when we talked to her last week. But every game is going to be against somebody they're battling for one of those spots. You got Phoenix, 2 against LA, both at home, at Phoenix, 2 at Dallas, and then a home and home against Atlanta to end the season. I mean, it is going to be every minute's going to be dramatic in a way that, my goodness, who's our Liberty beat reporter? Because that's going to be a lot of intensity for her.
Hi, everyone.
Great Jackie Powell. Make sure for listeners, as opposed to YouTube, at Classic J Powell on Twitter. Jackie has covered this Liberty team dating back to the Tina Charles years, which are somehow the olden days. I still can't really get my mind around that. But Tina went out and had an epic Tina Charles type game on Sunday for the Seattle Storm. 27 points, 15 rebounds. She is the reason, as much as anyone, that Seattle won on a day that Sue Bird only had 1 field goal made, on a day that by and large, Atlanta was able to neutralize and limit Gabby Williams. And Jewel Lloyd shot 2 for 10. Even Breanna Stewart, only 5 for 13 from the field. But it was Tina, 27 points on 19 shot attempts, 4 threes. She had 4 blocks, an assist, a steal. What was your level of shock from 0% to 100% that this happened? Because my level of shock was 0%.
I'd say 0.001.
Okay, fair. I mean, this is just, I don't, so she's up above 7,000 points now, which is a mark that very few WNBA players have ever hit. Why are people continuing to sell Tina Charles short? What do you think that is, Jackie?
Oh man, I feel like we could spend an entire podcast on this. I think,
I agree.
well, I think the way in which she got onto Seattle definitely still rubs people the wrong way. And I listened to her post-game presser, and she acknowledged that in the most classy Tina-esque way that she could. She, I mean, Tina Charles is probably one of the smartest people we've both ever covered. And when you listen to her speak, she's so measured about every single word. Every single word matters so much. And I think she made a statement last night. She said, there were some people who I guess were a little frustrated with how I took control of my career. And I did what was the best for me. And Tina Charles has been put in some situations where she hasn't really been in control of her career. I mean, I don't know, maybe people don't like that she forced a trade to go to the Liberty from the Sun once Mike Tebow was fired. Did I get that right? Was that how it was?
Rough sequence of events. Yeah, I was around that time.
Although it's like, oh, well, Sylvia Fowles forced a trade as well, but there doesn't seem to be any bad blood on that.
True. And sat out, by the way. Didn't play for the Sky. And I don't say that to in any way denigrate Sylvia Fowles. It was a system at that time, and still by and large is a system that forces players who want out to essentially strong arm their teams in that way.
Yeah. So I think, why have people sold Tina short? I think the drama hasn't helped. And I think the fact that her heroics have only come in the regular season might be why people don't understand her greatness.
Maybe.
If Tina Charles finds a way to really help this Storm team in this postseason run, if she puts up another game like this in the postseason, it could change the arc of her career.
It's really interesting and really plausible, and it's going to be fascinating to see. Before I let you go, I do want to talk about, and I know you're working on a power rankings for Bleacher Report, which, again, Jackie writes for us. Jackie does so much for us, but read everything she writes. Make sure you do, and you're following her because she's one of the most important voices in this space. But give me your 1-2 and how excited you are about the potential finals matchup for those 1-2 today, as of right now. We won't hold you to it if this changes. The lead is constantly evolving and changing. But who's your 1-2?
Oh, you mean in my power rankings? The top two teams in my power rankings are not the two that I have in the finals, to be quite honest.
Interesting. All right.
One of them is.
You want to tease to it or you want to elaborate? Either one's okay by me.
I mean, I'll just say it. In my power rankings, although the Sky lost to the Liberty, I still put them at number 1. And although the Aces had a very ugly loss against the Dream, I still have them at number 2 because they were able to beat the Sparks and they were able to beat the Fever. If there was, if those games were closer, then maybe I'd drop them a little more, but they were able to take care of business against two teams that are far less cohesive and talented.
They did, and I understand that, and I appreciate it. I will say, and it's interesting to me, by net rating right now, you know which team is tops in the league? I didn't even realize this until I went back to check it today.
The Sun.
Yeah. It's really interesting.
They're
go ahead.
They are my 3. They moved up a spot. I had them at 4 last week. They had a pretty good week. And what's really nutty about it is Jonquel Jones was barely in the equation. And so I'm going to need to look at the numbers, but I did pose this in our next Slack. I said, well, what the hell does this mean? And so the one and only M. Adler said, basically, what I believe this shows us is that the jumbo lineup does not work. And
We'll have to go back to tinkering some more, which is a thing he was doing earlier this year. But again, we say he has to go back to tinkering. They're leading the lead in net rating. Dare I say, a team leading the lead in net rating, but third or fourth in different power rankings might be suffering from a bit of hashtag disrespect.
Oh, Howard.
Well, I'm glad we got to talk about Tina Charles today. She plays, of course, in Seattle now. There still is not an NBA team in Seattle, but I think it's important to know that small but growing league has some players that are worth watching as well. So we thank you, of course, for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day, especially in Seattle, where there's a standard of greatness from the WNBA that will be difficult for if the NBA, and I believe I have that right, the NBA ever does expand back out to Seattle to live up to. So in the meantime, still, your second listen, get up to date on the latest rumors and news in the NBA in just 30 minutes every day with Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA, your daily NBA update in just 30 minutes. Jackie Powell, it is always wonderful to see you. Thank you for the incredible work you do. I'm looking forward to power rankings. I am extremely looking forward to our playback this week on July 28th. Make sure you guys are tuning in for that as well. You can follow any link. There's an ad in every one of our issues, every one of our stories at the Nets. But at 7 p.m. Eastern time on July 28th, the Storm versus the Connecticut Sun. Watch it live with us right there on your computer. It is a good time. We always have fun, and we usually drop some news into it too. So you probably didn't want to be there for that.
We do. And before we go, should I tease who I see in the finals right now amid the whole how will the bracketing shake out? If we were to exclude, if it would work out in the bracket, the two teams I see in the finals right now are the Chicago Sky and the Tina Charles led Seattle Storm.
Ooh, the Tina Charles Storm. Wow, even ahead of the Honshu-led New York Liberty. That is a big statement. Okay, well, we'll be with you each and every day. Tomorrow, the great Gabriella Lewis joins me. We're going to be talking about the Atlanta Dream and Purse Energy, their vibes, which are up considerably. Until tomorrow, I am Howard Megdal, founder and editor of The Next, host at Locked On Women's Basketball, wishing you a wonderful Monday.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.